Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Chapter 8, the season and series finale of Apple TV's Pachinko. While this episode did land a lot of the big emotional moments that I've kind of come to expect out of this show, it did leave a lot of plot threads without adequate closure. But to that point, I kind of feel like this show is much more of a character study than it is a plot-driven one. And I would also acknowledge that while a lot of these plot threads were left, I'm going to stick with without closure, because I don't want to say that they were left like they ended poorly necessarily, but the lack of closure is a little frustrating. But I will say that a lot of these ones didn't necessarily need closure. You know, at the end of the episode, when I say at the end of the episode, I mean past the actual contents of the show to these interviews that happen at the end. And there's clips of women who actually lived through this, you know, just kind of sharing their experiences. And prior to that, there was like a title screen kind of that just, you know, had the words like this many people died during the conflict, this many people lived. And it talked about how many people went back home, how many people stayed, and it ended with saying like, you know, I don't think it posed a question, but it was something to the, you know, to the effect of like, how did these people, you know, manage? And it just said they endured. And I think to that point, that's kind of the purpose of a lot of this. Like a lot of the plot threads that I felt needed closure, at the end of the day, they kind of don't, because at the end of the day, we could take away from it that Sunja endured. But there are plot threads that I think that they should have had closure to, because they didn't have to introduce them if they weren't going to give them closure, like they weren't necessary. Or they were ones that just kind of felt like these aren't related to Sunja. These aren't ones that I could say that she just endured. And like there is some kind of like, okay, I'd like to know what happened here. But before I get into that, I'm going to talk about the episode proper. Yeah, I'm going to start by talking about the two storylines that we see this week. We see young Sunja in Osaka, 1938. Noah's like 7, I believe. And then we see, I'm just going to say the 1989 storyline because everyone's in it. Solomon, Hana, Sunja, everybody. So we start in Osaka, 1938. Noah's 7. Like I said, Mozasu has now been born. He's 1. And Isaac gets arrested for like anti-emperor sentiment. No one believes that he really could have done anything. And Sunja is at the police station confused as she runs into a woman who knows Isaac, and she pulls her away, and she essentially explains that, well, actually, she doesn't explain too much, but she says she's going to take Sunja to a guy named Hasegawa. And Noah translates between Hasegawa and Sunja for one of many times in this episode where Noah has to kind of be this translator between Japanese and Korean. And I again find it interesting that somebody who was born into this situation at 7 can speak both languages, and Sunja, even though she's much older, can only speak one because she wasn't born into this situation. And for what the show, she's been there for 7 years. She hasn't learned the language yet. But that's neither here nor there. But Hasegawa lets her know that essentially Isaac was kind of living a double life. He was, riling up the people, giving them hope, giving them motivation. He wanted to bring in workers from other countries to fight for peace and fair wages. So like he had this whole kind of like activist side life. And, you know, Sunja, in one of the first great scenes of this episode, well, I don't know what order this came in, but in one of the great scenes of this episode, she pushes back on that. She's like, you know, while you guys are living your whole activist lifestyle and shit, who's going to put food on my table? Who's going to help feed my family? And Yosef gets fired from his job just for being related to Isaac. So now one man is gone, the other man has no job, and they're over there, you know, it's like you have your fight and the morality behind it. But at the end of the day, the actuality is that now Sunja and Kyung-hee are left to fend for themselves, essentially, until Yosef can get another job, or if Yosef can get another job. And the one thing that I took away from, I don't want to say problem, but slight issue that I had with this scene is that I would have liked to have actually maybe seen Isaac living this life, see him maybe like riling up some workers, preaching like this, preaching in the literal sense, like not just preaching as a pastor, but like preaching to them, how they need to fight and how they need to band together and how they need to not take this anymore. I would have liked to have seen that rather than hear about it through dialogue from a character that I'm just meeting in the final episode. But that's a little minor quibble, but I don't really like things that are explained to me by the characters when I could have seen the characters just doing that. So after this conversation, the cops break into this place, and Sunja is taken for questioning. And there's a cool scene. It's almost kind of like a film noir scene in color, where it's like everything's dark, and like the only light is on Sunja and this interrogator kind of. And he basically just asked her if she had any involvement with any of the things that Isaac was up to, and she's like, "No, I didn't know anything about it." And she basically wraps up and says, he's just a good man. He's a good husband, he's a good father, and that's really all I know about him. I'm not going to tell you anything about all of this other stuff you asked me about. I don't know about that. And it made me wonder, because after she gets out, well, hold on, let me make sure I got this right. Prior to, so I got my timeline switched up in my notes a little bit, but I got it right in my head. Prior to her being questioned and the cops breaking in, that Hasegawa guy, he says that she's not going to find Isaac because someone gave his name specifically, i.e. someone like snitched on him. And it made me wonder who that might be. And I'm assuming it was Kohansu, but we don't get any closure on that, but we do get some interesting kind of like Kohansu connecting points. But I'm assuming that Kohansu might have had something to do with that. But I'll get to that in a minute when I talk about his conversation with Noah. So as they leave the police station, they see Isaac being taken out, and we are treated to another big emotional sequence that kind of, to me, mirrors a lot of what you saw in like a lot of Holocaust movies, where you might have like a wife and a kid who are trying to get to their father who's being taken away to a gas chamber or something like that. And you see him being Isaac, being taken away out of the police station into this car. And they're screaming for him through the gate. They both kind of like squeeze in between the bars and chase after him. Noah chases the car down the street. There's a really sick shot of, you see Noah in the background running after the car, and you see Isaac in the car crying. Like that was a really good shot. Really good scene. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that was kind of intentional. The idea of like them trying to squeeze through this gate to chase after the patriarch of the family. And all I could think of is all the times I've seen so many different documentaries, TV shows, and films that cover stuff like the Holocaust. And you see that so much, that them trying to get back to their father as the father's being taken away for something terrible. But moving back to 1989, we see that Hana is dying, which, I mean, she's been dying, but like now she's like at death's doorstep. She has a great scene with her mother toward the end where very few words are spoken, if any. I think she says "mama," and then I think her mother just says something like "I know" or something like that. Really sad scene, because we know what Hana was trying to convey and couldn't, given how terrible she was to her family when they first arrived to see her. So like her being now at death's doorstep, knowing that she didn't have much time left and barely being able to even muster up a thought or a sentence, to have her, you could tell, try to reconcile and make peace before she leaves. And like with no words being exchanged, with virtually no words being exchanged, a lot of emotion was exchanged. So I thought that was an incredible scene. So she expresses that she wishes she could go to Hawaii, and Solomon ultimately takes her up to the roof. He puts a lei on her, and that's kind of like his way of giving her this last wish. There's a great shot of Solomon kind of like overlooking the city at nighttime from this rooftop, and Sunja later joins him and gives him the watch that we've been following. Like I mentioned last week, it's like the watch from Pulp Fiction. And I was wondering, like, how'd she even get the watch, since the last time we saw it, Kohansu had it? Well, we find out about that. But I'm going to take before I get to that, I want to take this quick diversion to talk about Solomon, because in their conversation, there being Hana and Solomon's conversation, she told him to go after what he wants and to show no mercy, and because no mercy was shown to them. And this really hypes him up. And he goes to talk to this Yoshi guy after he had a conversation with his father, letting his father know everything that happened with the the failed attempt to buy the grandmother's land and not having a job anymore and not being able to go back to America. And the father tells him, you got to, Yoshi wants to do this pachinko thing. And his father's opposed because his father, I guess, knows Yoshi's grandfather. And he's like, this is not, he's the same blood. They can't be trusted. So what Solomon decides to do after his conversation with Hana, he goes back to Yoshi and he essentially is like, I want you to do your thing, whatever it is that you do, which Mosasu implied that this guy was a criminal. So he says, I want you to do whatever it is that you do, and then you get her to sell, and I'll make us big bucks off of that. And then we see the grandmother. She's like outside grading papers or something like that. It looked like, I'm not sure. And there's dogs barking, and she goes and looks through the like the crack in between the gate or whatever. And she's like, what's up with those dogs? And the guy gives a look, and she scurries back off into her house and locks the door. And that's the last we see of her. And that's an example of a lack of closure that was unnecessary. Why introduce the idea of Solomon changing his plan and deciding to be a lot more ruthless in in acquiring this land just to not show what happened? Like, okay, so they started off by intimidating her with dogs, and then what? Like, is the plan to have the dogs out there the whole time to where she's like, I don't want to live here anymore. It's too loud with dogs all the time. Like, I don't know, but that's a situation where that doesn't speak to they endured, and that doesn't give me any closure, and that's a plot line that didn't need to be introduced if you weren't going to give it closure. Even if that's a line that's in the book, a plot line that's in the book, and the book doesn't give it closure, you could at least give it closure for the show, because they show via the last episode that they are fully capable of making a great episode of television that does not draw from the book. So they could have done that, given it some closure, or just not included it, but that felt really empty to me to not know how this plan plays out. Like this whole episode, the way it ends, it feels like they really just left a whole lot of stuff out on the table with no options for more episodes or more seasons. So not sure about that. And then lastly, Sunja sets up shop in the market to sell kimchi. Like I said, she can't. They've got no one to provide for them with Yosef being out of a job and Isaac being gone. And it starts out looking like she's not gonna be that successful, but she gets out there. She really gets motivated. She's really trying to charm people, and she's shouting the best kimchi and whatever. And you see people kind of start to come over there and buy some, try some, and I'm left to assume that she endures, and I'm fine with that. But ending it there felt very strange, because I'm left to wonder, okay, so what happened to Isaac? And again, like I said at the beginning, you don't necessarily need to know. All we need to know is that Sunja made it to 1989 and she's okay. And that's kind of what I think this show, the whole purpose of this show, is to show the strength of these Japanese women at this time to endure and live through this treatment. And then today they're still here and they're still okay. And I think that's the point. But at the same time, I do still want to know what happened to Isaac. Like, we see in 1989, there is no Isaac, there is no Noah. And this show really leaned into the I'm not going to let what happened to Noah happen to Solomon angle. And then we never find out what happened to Noah. Did he become a bad guy? Did he grow up to be a bad guy? Like, did he end up dead? Like, what happened to Noah? And how was Sunja responsible? And again, we could look at it like she endured whatever it was that happened to Noah. But like, why introduce this and lean into it so hard if you're not going to tell us what happened? And I think me trying to grasp at straws here, I'm wondering if Kohansu was involved in Isaac's arrest, which takes Isaac off the table. He meets up with Noah. I don't want to say meets up with Noah. He stalks Noah in the street and what gave him what I believe to be the watch. We can assume that he would have then given it to Sunja, and then maybe whatever happened to Noah is maybe Sunja in need of some sort of man in her life, with Kohansu being there, which she would know since Noah gave her the watch, and she told Solomon the watch saved her family. Maybe she invited Kohansu back into her life, and maybe he helped her endure. But I mean, that's a whole lot of assumption for me right there. But you know, like I said, I was left to wonder how she was able to give the watch to him, and I'm pretty sure that's how, is that Noah gave it to her. So maybe Noah got corrupted. You know, like I said, she invited Kohansu back into her life, and Noah got corrupted. Maybe he became someone like a Kohansu. And maybe that's why she said, you know, I'm not going to let what happened to Noah happen to Solomon. He was corrupted by greed, and like Kohansu was, and I'm not going to let that happen to Solomon, although that is clearly what is happening to Solomon. So that's why I say, like, there's a lot of stuff that's left open really widely that I think that they should have really kind of like worked toward wrapping up or addressing. But having said that, I thought this season was a strong episode of television. I'm not going to sit here and say it was my favorite thing or that I think it's going to rack up all the awards. It's the best show, whatever. It had very, very high highs. It didn't really have any lows, but it did lag a lot in the middle. It was slow. And then, like I said, this ending left me a little unfulfilled with all of the things that it didn't provide closure to. So that's how I'm going to wrap this one up. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Check out some other videos on the channel. See if there's any other shows that you might want to join me in watching and talking about. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.